Intense. Just intense. BlackRock is saying the unthinkable. Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, talks about recommending that countries buy Bitcoin. And he talks about the absolute $700,000 Bitcoin election hype. No joke. Larry Fink says here in a new interview that in this scenario, he envisions Bitcoin could rise to $700,000. Game over. He even says now that big investors are considering allocating up to 5% into Bitcoin, and he's in touch with Southern Rail funds who are all showing interest in Bitcoin. And all of this is happening with the anti-freedom fighters in Davos. Right at the World Economic Forum with Klaus Schwab, Olaf Schnitz, and all the brothers. When I heard that, I had to listen a second and a third time to see if I was really hearing correctly and if it wasn't perhaps an AI fake or something like that. But no. Larry Fink now seems to be on the ultra-bullish side, and that is really explosive. As one crazy scene after another is emerging here at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and Bitcoin is really playing a major role, a really insane role. By the way, for anyone wondering what happened to my eye here, I obviously had a fight here in El Salvador with Ethereum people. No kidding, I picked up a papaya and the papaya juice actually went right into my eye. I looked in my eye and it wasn't a ripe papaya, and I don't know, now it's somehow infected, which is really weird. But whatever, we're now looking at what's currently going on at BlackRock, because we know that BlackRock has been offering Bitcoin ETFs for some time. We know that Larry Fink is bullish on Bitcoin, but the statement he makes here is the most bullish statement he's ever made, and you need to understand that BlackRock has some serious clout. That means that when BlackRock says something here, people listen, big states listen big. Asset managers, whatever. When I say something, a few people on YouTube might tune in. But when Larry Fink says something, the whole world listens. And if Larry Fink gives Bitcoin the green light and says Bitcoin could rise to $700,000, telling you to get 5% Bitcoin in your portfolio, then there's going to be a whole lot of capital flowing into Bitcoin. And that's the crazy thing, that Larry Fink, just like me, you, and so on, everyone who has anything to do with Bitcoin, we now have a collective incentive to pump Bitcoin up. Larry Fink has the biggest bazookas. He's probably got the biggest cannons in play. Larry Fink can pump the Bitcoin price way higher than I ever could with my YouTube channel. By the way, I reached 30,000 followers. Let's fucking go. Thank you very much. It's only because of you all, because you always support me so amazingly. Anything's possible. A huge, huge thank you. Smash that subscribe button if you haven't already. It's really crazy how everything is picking up speed here. Now it can really go to the moon. Now the bull run can really kick in. It's awesome. I really thought long and hard about what to name this video because it's about to trigger a real shockwave here. So really sit down. If you're in the car, pull over, because this could really shock you. People are already writing online. I can see the title of the next Bitcoin hotel video. BlackRock wants $700,000 Bitcoin. But the whole thing is way too bearish, because what Larry Fink is saying is way too bullish to just call the title $700,000 Bitcoin. People are already saying, hey OMG, here comes the hyper Bitcoin Godzilla candle, but the whole thing is way too bearish, because what Larry Fink is saying is way too bullish to just call the title $700,000 Bitcoin. People are already saying, hey OMG. Here comes the hyper Bitcoin Godzilla candle, or why the Bitcoin price is supposed to skyrocket to 700 billion trillion, or people are writing about a massive Godzilla pump, more. Why the Bitcoin price is supposed to skyrocket to 700 billion trillion, or people are writing about a massive Godzilla pump, more. Of course, we can't forget the alarm, because what Larry Fink has to say is absolutely massive. But I don't want to beat around the bush too much. Check it out, let's fucking go.
You, if you're scared, go. Of your debasement of, you can have an international instrument called Bitcoin that can handle these local. You can have an international instrument called Bitcoin, which these local fear will be overwhelmed. So I'm a big believer in the application of this instrument. So if that becomes true and you see that there's a real half against maybe hyper, security, or equities. The question is, could you see a 2% or 5% allocation? I was with a sovereign wealth fund during this week, and that was the conversation. During this week, and that was the conversation. Should we have a 2% allocation? Should we have a 5% allocation? If everybody jumped on that conversation, it would be $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 for Bitcoin. I'm not promoting it, by the way. That's not my promo.
You really need to understand what's going on here. We probably have one of the most powerful people in the world here, managing as many assets as some countries have in their GDP. So a massive force. And Larry Fink is actually making the call for a $700,000 Bitcoin price if countries really start buying Bitcoin. He's talking about how he's in contact with major wealth funds, sovereign wealth funds. So a sovereign wealth fund is a state. That means there have to be some big nations planning to buy Bitcoin. So it has to be very clear that there have to be some big nations planning to buy Bitcoin. Because the discussion was, should we put 1%, 2%, or 5% into the portfolio? Any big nations planning to buy Bitcoin? Because the discussion was, should we put 1%, 2%, or 5% into the portfolio? And BlackRock is now recommending a 2% Bitcoin portfolio allocation. Let's see how long they stick with the 2%. Look here at Bitcoin Beach, the sun is shining. But now the question is whether to use up to a 5% portfolio allocation. And he also makes it very clear, hey guys, if the discussion is happening everywhere about whether it's going to be 2%, 4%, 5%, and so on, then Bitcoin is going to shoot up to $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. And then Larry Fink is actually making the call for a Godzilla candle, for a Valhalla candle. The discussion is going on everywhere, whether it will be 2%, 4%, 5%, and so on. Then Bitcoin will shoot up to $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. And then Larry Fink himself actually makes the call for a Godzilla candle, for a Valhalla candle. Feel free to drop in the comments which candle we should use next, because we're starting to run out of superlatives here. Because, I mean, you really haven't heard anything like this in the Bitcoin scene before. Usually, there were some YouTubers who would say, okay, hey, come on, Bitcoin is going to hit 1 million. Or Samson Mouse says, hey, the Omega candle is coming. Or some people like Max Kaiser saying, hey, watch out, Bitcoin is going to $400,000. Or something like that. But the fact that we actually have Larry Fink talking about a $700,000 Bitcoin price is something new. And now we really have to be careful. He says, of course, he's not promoting it. That's obviously his laughter, but also, he's not promoting it, but at the same time, he's laughing. Because I've already told you, Larry Fink has the incentive to pump up the Bitcoin price. Because how does Larry Fink make money? By selling ETFs. The more ETFs he sells, the more money he makes. And the higher the Bitcoin price goes, the more people want to buy ETFs, the more money he makes. And of course, he also gets more fees when the Bitcoin price is up because he has more assets under management and all that. So basically, an asset manager is always trying to compulsively get more assets under management. So Larry Fink is basically driven to have a high Bitcoin price. That means that he says officially here that he does not want to promote it officially and so on, because of course he has to maintain neutrality and so on. And of course this is a public interview and everything is already clear. But secretly, and this is just my analysis, Larry Fink is of course clearly interested in a high Bitcoin price because, firstly, he is invested himself and his own bags are going up. You obviously don't know how much he personally has, no idea. And BlackRock itself doesn't actually have that much Bitcoin, to be honest. BlackRock only has smaller stakes in Bitcoin. It will also be interesting to see whether BlackRock will now make larger allocations to Bitcoin. Right now, they don't have huge allocations yet. So when I say BlackRock is buying Bitcoin, I also mean that BlackRock's clients are buying Bitcoin. But he obviously makes more the higher the Bitcoin price goes. And that's why it's probably not too far-fetched to say, hey, Larry Fink, do you want to pump up the Bitcoin price? But hey, that wasn't even everything. You guys are talking about 700,000 Bitcoins. Southern Rail funds are talking about Bitcoin. Now we can also speculate, okay, which nation is it? Is it Russia? Is it China? No idea who that is. It will probably be someone who is somehow close to the USA. Because if, for example, someone talks to Larry Fink about buying Bitcoin ETFs here, there was a request for that just recently. I don't even remember which Bitcoin ETF provider it was, whether it was Bitwise or I don't remember. I can't quite put it together anymore. Some CEO from some ETF provider also made a post saying they received a request from a big country that wants to buy Bitcoin ETFs. And then a lot of people commented underneath saying, yeah, hey, no country is that dumb to buy Bitcoin ETFs. Yeah, it's pretty clear that countries are that dumb and buy Bitcoin ETFs. Countries have also stored some of their gold not in their own bunkers, but somewhere abroad, where they have no access to it. It's the same with countries and so on. We also saw this in Russia, where there were simply foreign states. They were not in self-custody, but rather in third-party custody, if you want to put it that way, which is actually always the case with states, and then they were simply gone. This means that countries often simply buy Bitcoin ETFs here for the sake of simplicity. And if Levering Things is saying there are negotiations with people who might be making a Bitcoin allocation, then I'm also assuming they want to buy a BlackRock Bitcoin ETF. So it has to be some countries that are also cool with the U.S. Because Russia, for example, isn't going to buy a BlackRock Bitcoin ETF because Russia knows exactly that would make them censorable. Russia has learned its lesson. China definitely won't do that either because China knows, hey, the US could potentially be our enemy or not exactly friendly towards us. That's why we don't buy Bitcoin ETFs that Trump could potentially censor later on. So it has to be some country that is very, very close to the U.S. or even a direct ally of the U.S. That's at least my interpretation of it. For example, El Salvador has its Bitcoin self-custody, which they can't be censored, but you don't know where the self-custody is happening. So that's already a big secret. Does Bukele have the Bitcoin on his phone? Does he have them just sitting on an exchange? Are they buried somewhere in El Salvador? Is there a multi-sig solution? Nobody knows that. But that's basically the exciting story that's happening behind the scenes. But the really wild thing that Larry Fink said isn't just about the $700,000 where the Bitcoin price could go up, but he said if you're worried about debasement or political instability, then you need to buy Bitcoin. That means Bitcoin is a hedge against debasement, Bitcoin is a hedge against inflation, and Bitcoin is also a protection against political instability. Then you need to buy Bitcoin. So that means Bitcoin is a hedge against debasement, Bitcoin is a hedge against inflation, and Bitcoin is also a protection against political instability. And where do we see political instability? Right now, in a whole lot of countries. And here Larry Fink basically says, hey, then Bitcoin comes into play. And when he makes the pitch, it also means that Bitcoin has the largest total addressable market. Because when it comes to unstable money, I'd say maybe aside from Switzerland, and you might say that the US dollar is stable, but honestly, you can't really say that the US dollar is stable. Let's say maybe Switzerland is still somewhat stable, and the US dollar is still somewhat stable. But other than that, pretty much the whole world is affected by not having stable fiat currencies. And if we say, for example, that the dollar isn't stable either, then the total addressable market for Bitcoin is basically the entire world. That means almost everyone using fiat money here, or probably even the folks in Switzerland, are dealing with depreciating currency if you look at it that way. So you could even say that the entire world is the total addressable market for Bitcoin. And that's basically what Larry Fink is pitching, because he says that Bitcoin is a tool against devaluation. And that means Bitcoin can not only rise to $700,000, but it can actually trend towards the $1 million range. Because anyone using fiat currencies has the debasement problem. And according to Larry Fink, Bitcoin can solve this debasement problem. And a lot of people are dealing with political problems, of course. He goes even further, saying Bitcoin is an international instrument. That's pretty clear. You can make cross-border payments, send Bitcoin anywhere, use it worldwide, everywhere. For example, what I've noticed again is when you go to Paraguay, then over to El Salvador, dealing with exchanging money and all that. And in Paraguay, they haven't exactly accepted Bitcoin everywhere. That was definitely a killer stress. You just come here to El Salvador, bam, you pay for something at the gas station or at the supermarket with Bitcoin. Of course, it doesn't work everywhere. But that's obviously the global tool he's talking about. He says that Bitcoin is overcoming local fears here. And he also says that Bitcoin is a hedge, specifically a hedge against equities, meaning stocks. What he meant by that exactly, I don't really know. He probably means that Bitcoin doesn't correlate much with stocks, and that's why it's a certain hedge here. Or, of course, the third-party risks that come with stocks, like CEO risk, company risk, industry risk, which Bitcoin kind of levels out. That's really strong and very clear here. Or, of course, the third-party risks that come with stocks, like CEO risk, company risk, industry risk, which Bitcoin kind of levels out. That's definitely very strong and very clear here. So I'm absolutely fascinated by Larry Fink's speech here, but you have to stay critical, of course. You shouldn't just praise him like he's some kind of god or anything. Larry Fink should also be viewed critically, and BlackRock should be viewed critically as well. You have to look at all of this, let's say, from two sides. On one side, of course, there's the price aspect, and on the other side, there's the freedom aspect, where you can also say, hey, he's selling Bitcoin ETFs, which are basically some kind of Bitcoin derivatives and stuff. That's why I always recommend you guys to buy Bitcoin directly, best at 21 Bitcoin. Some customers, you can easily and securely buy Bitcoin with the code BitcoinHotel. You can still get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin, and then you should immediately transfer your Bitcoins to a hardware wallet. I always recommend the TREZOR because then you don't have any third-party risk. Then you can't be censored by Trump, Larry Fink, or any other clowns. Then you are completely self-sovereign. Even the dog here has figured it out, right? How's it going? Everything good with you? Yeah. Say hi to everyone from me. Big shout out to all of you, also from the dog here in El Salvador. See you later, folks. Let me know what you think about this. Regarding the massive tremors from Larry Fink, peace out. Peace out.